Our speaker this morning is Ms. McConney. Ms. McConney serves as the Director of Residential Life, teaches history, and coaches the varsity girls ice hockey. She's also dorm head in Davie Hall. She would like to take a moment to thank those that got her to Hill, as it has changed her life forever. Ms. McConney.
My earliest memories include a lot of me falling on my face and hitting my head and smashing my body against really any available surface. Maybe my earliest memories are the direct result of too many blows to the head. I guess I'll never really know. One such memory is of me in the emergency room at 2 years old, getting stitches in my head. I vividly recall the searing glow from the overhead light the doctor used in the hospital while working on me. It's almost weird how crystal clear that part of the memory is. I don't remember the incident that actually landed me in the ER, though. According to my dad, I needed 5 stitches in my head because I decided it was a good idea to climb the bunk beds like my older brother just had. The difference between his attempt and mine was that he managed to not pull down an iron on his head. Another memory, and I'm not sure if I actually remember this or if it is stuck in my head because my parents often told me stories about my youth, involves my running around our house nonstop. I would just go and go and go and go and go and go until I dropped. One day, at the age of 3 or so, my grandmother was babysitting me while my parents went out on a date. They returned to her house to take me back home and found me dead asleep in the middle of a floor with a blanket just like haphazardly tossed on me. My grandmother frantically explained, I couldn't get her to wind down, so I just let her collapse there and sleep. My parents nodded their heads, said very little, lifted me from the ground and brought me to the car. Their understated reaction tells me they'd accepted the rigors of dealing with my chaotic energy. Another. Every summer, prior to both my brother and I becoming avid hockey players, our family would spend about 2 weeks at the New Jersey shore. My mom loved the shore, and I did too, but I can say with complete certainty that my mom did not love the fact that I always seemed to scrape and or bruise my face a day or two in advance of our planned departure. By the age of 6, I had a streak of 3 straight summers at the beach defined by damage to my face. We were only a day away from my breaking that 3-year streak, from avoiding another shore trip plagued by scrapes and bruises, when I decided to bomb down a driveway in the neighborhood on my rollerblades. 4-year streak achieved. In the aftermath of this milestone, I remember my mom hovering over me, antiseptic in hand, wiping diligently against my forehead, and saying, Laura, I'm going to have to convince people we're not abusing you. I didn't quite get her humor or outrage at the age of 6. All of those childhood memories are still somewhat fuzzy. Once I did get into playing hockey, they start to become a little bit clearer. One summer, not too long after I achieved that 4-year streak, my dad signed me up for a hockey camp at Center Ice over in Oaks. According to my dad's memory, I was the only girl there, which certainly wasn't all that surprising for the state of women's hockey in Pennsylvania. But my older brother was at the camp too, so I likely either didn't notice or simply fit in because of my penchant for reckless abandon. I don't remember what skills I learned from that camp or even how good I was at the time. I do, however, remember one thing. My dad yelled from the stands, "Skate harder!" he bellowed. Well, my roughly 8-year-old self thought I was skating plenty hard. I made sure to let him know that mid-stride. Perhaps that's when I first found my coaching voice. My dad never yelled again from the stands. Have you ever thought about the ways in which you reflect on your own life, about what you remember versus what you don't, about the memories you have? A few days ago, in preparation for this last chapel talk of the term, I took a look back over my own senior year high school yearbook. Like the sixth form do at Hill, I submitted a blurb for my senior page to thank and acknowledge those that helped me reach the important milestone. My blurb mentioned, in order, my parents, my siblings, my advisor, and my coaches. My friends came next, those that I was graduating with, then followed by writing some encouraging words for those friends and teammates I was leaving behind, those that would remain in high school while I went on to college. I remember working on nailing my message, on whittling it down to who I would include and who I simply couldn't, on carefully eliminating spaces and resorting to abbreviations in order to meet the allotted character counts. This may sound like a familiar process. On finally rousing the courage to click send on the email back to the faculty member who is collecting the information, on completing my entry into posterity. But if you had asked me just a few days ago what I wrote in this message, I would have been completely bemused. I would have had no idea. I probably would have guessed that I thanked my parents and my siblings first because they're very important to me. Families like that. After that, though, I wouldn't have had a clue. And it's not because I don't remember who I would have wanted to thank, but because I've moved on from that phase of my life. There are other things that are at the forefront of my mind now. It's not that I cannot recall the times I spent with these folks or the lessons I learned or the ups and downs that I faced. Instead, all of these have just become blurrier over time. They have faded into the background of my mind. At least the specifics have. The larger impressions that these people and these memories have made on me have become baked into the fabric of my character. Back to that initial question, though. Why do I remember certain things but not others? Well, I think it involves the notion of what has made me who I believe myself to be, this idea of my sense of self. In many ways, I still think of myself as that kid, the one filled with that reckless abandon, the one who feared nothing, the one who would smash her face against asphalt in order to gain a little bit more speed on her rollerblades. Yet my experiences in life after my early childhood do not suggest that I really am this person. According to that yearbook, my high school teachers consistently referred to me as graceful and composed. Quite a contrast to the child who could not settle down long enough to really take a nap and would instead just collapse on the floor. Collapsing is not particularly graceful. So did I morph into a different person after shouting back at my father? Did the desire to climb into speed disappear? Is it possible to be the person we are as well as the person we remember ourselves to be? Can we be two people at once? I have learned over the course of time to not yell, "I am Dad," back into the stands. And yet I still want to sometimes. Now I just have more control, more restraint, a greater understanding of timing. I am older, perhaps wiser, and better equipped to deal with bunk beds, fatigue, and short trips. But I still yearn to smash my body against any available surface, even though I know it will hurt more now than it did when I was young. Maybe I'm not all that different than I was. I think I'm allowed to be a contradiction of sorts. Someone who is shaped by both recklessness and control. For it was my time in high school that I learned how to express restraint, how to best time conversations and dialogue, how to not give into that urge to run until I drop, how to become, perhaps, wiser. And while I do not have the precise memories of these learned behaviors, I am left with the vaguely recalled remnants of those lessons. I do not remember any of the specifics, but instead can whittle it down into a blurry time frame of when those lessons must have occurred. I'm left with the impression of the lesson, the takeaway. I bear none of the pain of the failure that preceded it, the failure that must have come alongside the lesson itself, regardless of whether or not it involved bodily harm. As I think about what this chapel talk really means, I think back to all the other chapel talks that I have heard over the years from all of you. All of those talks sixth formers have delivered in my time at the Hill. Many students speak about their time here, about how their friends, their family, and their experiences have shaped who they are. It's always fascinating to hear what aspects of their lives have stuck in their memory. What do they choose to include in their talk, in their sixth form yearbook blurb, and their recollections of this place? The memories shared at this lectern have always been varied and unpredictable. They have often showed the larger school audience a different side of the speaker, a part of them that they rarely expose to the world. But there is always a common thread. Why do we remember what we remember? For those of you that have written a chapel talk, have delivered one, or hope to do so in the future, How will you choose what to include and what not to include? Will yours be about childhood, about the Hill, about something else? I'm always surprised and not surprised as I see students wrangle over these questions in preparing their message, as I have conversations with them in determining what they want to share with the community. Because it's almost always the case that those we think we know the most have other parts of themselves to share. But it does take courage to open up in ways we don't normally do, especially when the entire school is sitting in front of us. So what's the message? What am I trying to say? The introspection, I'm sure, is great to hear and everything, but it doesn't teach you anything. And it's my understanding that teaching you is what I've been asked to do at this pulpit. Well, the message is ultimately up to your interpretation. What will stick with you will be what you need to learn right now, what fits into the narrative of who you believe yourself to be, even if you're not quite sure who that is yet. I accept that this will be the outcome of this chapel talk. You'll remember it, or you won't. It will stick in your memory, or it won't. You're really listening, or you're not. There is a bigger picture here, but I am leaving it mostly up to you to put all the pieces together. That said, before I lose your attention, I want you to pause, think back, and find for yourself the common thread of the stories I told. What do you remember? The connections that matter to me include family, love, and support. Then again, I remember more of these stories than I actually shared. My dad took me to the ER, held my hand with that light beaming over me, even though he didn't tell my mom we took that trip until after she returned. I know my grandmother threw that blanket over top of me, even though I undoubtedly drove her mad by refusing to settle down. My mom took care of the large scrape over my left eyebrow, even though she was worried about others judging her for the ragged state of her then only daughter. Why do we remember what we remember? Here's at least what I think. We hold on to these experiences that remind us of when we felt loved. I barely remember what the bedroom I was in looked like when I cracked my head open at 2. But again, I remember it so vividly because my dad was right there the whole time. I remember stopping and yelling back at my father later on in my life because he and I have spoken about it so many times over the phone. This story and my dad's recounting of it remind me of who I am and who I've become. In essence, our memories are not entirely our own. We share them with those we shared the experience with those we tell the stories to, with the ones that we love. And even if the details are fuzzy, which they almost always are, it will always be worth leaning in harder to share them with others. You will not remember everything about your time here at Hill, nor will you remember what you wrote on your sixth form yearbook page. But you will remember how this place made you feel. I know I do. So let go of trying to hyper-focus on any one individual event, of feeling anything in that specific moment and feeling whether it will break you or not. Let go of the need to remember it all because you're not going to. Instead, lean into how it feels. Lean into the quiet of a Sunday afternoon spent doing homework and friends. Lean into the ones you love. If you can't remember it all, and you won't, then focus your attention on the common thread, on the connections you make. What will you remember? Thank you.
Please stand for the